On September of 2019, the NBA decided to crack down on tampering. This was a direct response to the Lakers. 2 years prior, they were hit with the largest tampering fine in NBA history, $500,000, with the NBA investigating unauthorized communications between Lakers GM Rob Pelinka and Paul George, who was still under contract with the Indiana Pacers. The rules state if a player is under contract, an executive or GM of another team is not allowed to pursue them. The problem is, things like this are hard to enforce. It's more about who gets caught as opposed to who's doing it, cause in all likelihood, many teams are doing it. Under the radar. You could just be having a casual conversation and the NBA would accuse you of tampering. That actually happened again with the Lakers a year later. In 2018, Magic Johnson was fined $50,000 for, quote, praising and comparing Giannis Antetokounmpo to himself. Since when was that not allowed? Literally all he did was go on ESPN and say that he's an amazing player and that he's going to win a championship someday. And that counts as tampering? Really? Anyway, how's it going, folks? My name's Andy, and today, with the recent tampering investigations on Kyle Lowry and Lonzo Ball, I thought it'd be a good time to talk about this topic. In this video, we'll take a look at the history of tampering, some notable incidents that made the NBA crack down on it, and the penalties that came along with it. Realistically, what can be done to solve this issue? Anyway, let's get started. But before we start, this video is sponsored by Sleeper. What is it? It's the best app to host your fantasy leagues, whether it's fantasy football, basketball, or even League of Legends. It's completely free and has no ads. Unlike most fantasy platforms, Sleeper allows you to interact with other users through text and voice chat. It has every feature that other platforms have: redraft, dynasty, best ball, but also far more customizable. You can change any of these settings to your liking and have total control over your draft and league. The matchmaking feature is top-notch, allowing you to find a league that suits your interest. Filter out the formats you don't like and give it a go. Sleeper's design is very clean and user-friendly, and their mission is to connect people around the world through sports. To get the app, click my link in the description below. Thank you to Sleeper for sponsoring this video. Prior to the 1990s, tampering wasn't seen as a huge deal. Everyone knew that team executives were talking to players on other teams prior to signing them. There were superstars joining big market teams through this method. There were endless amounts of communication between rival organizations. There was a rule in the NBA legislation that prohibited tampering, but the rules were quite vague back then. Mostly, it just meant that you can't give players an illegal contract that doesn't abide by the rules, or you're paying somebody under the table. Those are clearly illegal. But besides that, nobody cared. It wasn't until the 1990s when they started rewriting what the term tampering actually means, eventually leading to the most notorious tampering controversy of the decade. And it didn't even involve a player. In the 1995 offseason, at this point, Pat Riley has been the coach of the Knicks for 4 seasons. He helped lead the franchise to their best years of that era. Then, all of a sudden, he shocked the NBA world by joining the Knicks' biggest rival, the Miami Heat. Not only was he given the head coaching job, but he also became the president and granted complete control over the team's decisions. The issue was, Riley actually had 1 year left on his contract in New York, and the Knicks organization was absolutely furious. They accused the Heat of having extensive talks with Riley behind closed doors, despite Riley still being under contract. This ordeal was even made public as newspapers and magazines talked about it too. Riley's deal with Miami was known everywhere. However, back then, there was no precedent for enforcing the tampering rules. Heck, nobody even knew what the extent of tampering was allowed, considering David Stern wrote the rules so ambiguously. As a result, the CEO of the Knicks was furious, and shall I say, he was on a tamper tantrum? They sent multiple letters to the NBA office claiming that this was ridiculously unfair, and that the Heat illegally interfered in contract negotiations while Riley was still working for the Knicks. And you know what? David Stern agreed. A few months later, they settled this conflict and the Knicks were granted the Heat's 1996 first-round pick, plus $1 million in cash. To be clear, this wasn't a fine. The NBA forced the Miami Heat to give some compensation to the Knicks for losing Riley. The pick turned out to be the mere 19th pick, where the Knicks drafted Walter McCarty. While this did get resolved, it was essentially just settled between two teams. There was still no standard to how tampering should be handled. A year later in 1996, when Shaq left Orlando and joined the Los Angeles Lakers, some more executives around the league threw out accusations, claiming that Jerry West and the Lakers staff were constantly pursuing Shaq all season long, while he was still playing for the Magic. He was probably gonna leave Orlando anyway, but this gave the Lakers an advantage over other teams before the offseason even started. However, in this case and the other case with Riley, there was no hard proof that tampering was involved. I mean, even if there was, what is the NBA supposed to do? Plant a microchip into every player to make sure they don't talk to GMs on other teams? Send the paparazzi after them or something? I mean, I don't know. Although nowadays, people have gotten caught more often because of newer technology. Phones, social media, chat logs, things like that have made it easier to communicate, but also easier to track what people are doing. Thanks, Google. A few years later, another prominent tampering case came to light. This time, there was real evidence it happened. I've talked about this one previously in a separate video, but basically to sum it up, the Wolves got caught arranging a deal with Joe Smith under the table in order to circumvent the salary cap. Kevin McHale and the Wolves only got caught because some agents had a falling out and one of them leaked the secret. As a result, the NBA severely punished the Wolves, forcing them to forfeit 4 future first-round picks, and temporarily suspended the Wolves' front office and owner from making any transactions. To forfeit 4 first-rounders, especially when most of them probably would have fell in the top 10, that's the harshest punishment for tampering we've ever seen. McHale claimed it was unfair because so many teams are making deals under the table, but only they got punished because they got caught. Afterwards, when other teams saw how severely they got punished, I think it scared them. The topic of tampering did not come up again until the late 2000s. Specifically, Boston's Big Three and the Miami Heat's Big Three. We've heard from both teams openly talk about teaming up. It wasn't even a secret. They talked to each other beforehand before deciding to join the same team. Granted, this probably happened in the past too, but nobody cared. Now, people started to care. For the Celtics and Heat, it introduced a different question. It's illegal for a GM to interact with another team's player under contract, but is it illegal for players on different teams to talk to each other? I mean, most of these guys are just friends. You can't stalk them, nobody is monitoring them 24/7. However, it wouldn't be until years later when the NBA enforced more strict tampering rules, in 2019, like I mentioned earlier. It addressed the player-to-player tampering laws too. According to an NBA statement, here's what it said. As announced prior to the start of the 2019-20 season, the NBA has adopted a stricter enforcement approach for conduct relating to tampering, salary cap circumvention, and free agency timing rules, including with respect to the rule prohibiting player-to-player tampering. Player-to-player tampering. Now, that's a hard thing to prove and deal with. Unless you publicly make a statement trying to recruit somebody to join your team, I don't see how they can enforce it. Players around the league are friends with each other. How do you prevent them from hanging out and talk about teaming up? It's easy to not get caught, just don't say it in public. But there were times when players actually did that. For example, in 2020, Draymond Green appeared in a few episodes of NBA on TNT, and they asked him a few questions about his perspective on the game. In one segment, he talked about Devin Booker's place on the Phoenix Suns, where he said, "It's not good for him. It's not good for his career." Then he encouraged Booker to join a more competent team. Funny enough, this was before their 2021 playoff run, so now Draymond's point is irrelevant. Adam Silver noticed this offhand comment he made on TNT, so he fined him $50,000 for tampering. It wasn't the first time for Dre either. Back in 2016, people accused him of trying to recruit Kevin Durant. According to ESPN writer Royce Young, this is what happened. After playing the Warriors in Oakland with Super Bowl 50 in the Bay Area on Sunday, Durant decided to stay behind while most of his teammates traveled to Phoenix for a game against the Suns. Green and Steph Curry were also there, and that's when seeds were first planted. Not coincidentally, it was a day before the Thunder traveled to Oakland that a report came out that Durant was considering the Warriors as a possible free agency destination. The recruiting push was officially on. This was before OKC and Golden State even played in the playoffs. There's been other potential cases of tampering in recent years too. All of this played a role in the NBA trying to tighten the rules to prevent it. Another moment happened in the 2015 offseason. You remember that whole fiasco involving DeAndre Jordan and the Mavericks? That tweet where Chris Broussard said, "Mark Cuban is beside himself, driving around downtown Dallas begging through texts Jordan's family for address to DeAndre's home." But in reality, Cuban was not doing any of that. Well, he did get accused of tampering prior to that though. Him and Chandler Parsons, in the months leading up to Jordan's free agency, they would text and FaceTime each other frequently, and even host entourage parties to recruit him to join the Mavs. That was all before the free agency period even started, so it should have been tampering. It happened again in 2017, where Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum publicly tried to recruit Carmelo Anthony. It happened again with Kevin Durant in 2019, where it was announced he would join the Brooklyn Nets, literally within minutes of being illegally allowed to negotiate with him. So you know he must have been talking to Brooklyn before free agency even started. LeBron was also sent a tampering warning where he said something as simple as, "It would be incredible to play with Anthony Davis." Like, seriously? Are athletes not allowed to praise other players anymore? Keep in mind, most of this happened before September of 2019. The rules were tightened up after that. Hence why this whole tampering accusation of Kyle Lowry and Lonzo Ball, we honestly will never know how serious it is. So how do we combat this? Well, in recent years, Adam Silver proposed even more harsh penalties. For example, if an organization gets caught doing it, the maximum fine is raised from $5 million to $10 million. For fines against an individual player, the maximum is now $250,000. That's all fine and dandy, but it doesn't address the main issue of trying to figure out who's doing it and who's not. It's more about compliance. The league expects the players and GMs to cooperate, even though they could get a clear advantage if they do tamper. Even if the NBA investigates all business contacts and messages, they're not allowed to check into your personal history. That's a complete breach of privacy. But seeing what the world is moving towards, perhaps privacy will be the next big question. Anyway, that's all folks. Let me know your thoughts on this topic. I know it's somewhat controversial, but it's also been swept under the rug for such a long time, cause the NBA just doesn't know what to do. Let me know your ideas in the comments on how to deal with this. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope y'all enjoyed the video, and of course, as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.